Just as Claire Brody reached to flip the open sign to closed, the wind shoved hard against the diner windows, as if to say, not yet. The neon hum of the sign buzzed faintly, casting a flicker of pink against the snow-dusted glass. Claire's hand hovered in the air, her fingers brushing the switch, then falling back to her side. She exhaled slowly, her breath catching in the dim light. Behind her, the scent of old coffee lingered beneath lemon cleaner and fryer oil, a combination so familiar it had long since stopped meaning anything. Still, she stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence thicken. She moved back behind the counter and paused beside the old framed menu mounted near the till. Emily Jean's looping script danced across the faded paper: Meatloaf Thursdays, cherry pie, if you're lucky, and in the lower corner, written in red ink that had nearly bled into the frame, keep the pot hot, someone's always coming. Claire traced it with her thumb, the glass cool beneath her skin. Her mother had believed in small, stubborn kindnesses. Claire wasn't so sure anymore. The till held 112 val and 38 taus, not counting the quarters. Claire counted twice. She did it more out of ritual than hope. The propane guy would be by first thing Friday, and she didn't have the cash. She could call him, ask for another week, but she already owed him for the last fill. She pressed her fingertips against her temples, then let them drop. Her coat still hung on the peg near the kitchen, untouched since 4 a.m. She crossed to the griddle, pulled out 2 slices of white bread, and slapped them with margarine. The cheese she peeled from a bulk pack was the last of it. She didn't bother plating the sandwich, just held it in one hand and leaned on the counter with the other, chewing slowly as she watched the snowfall sharpen outside. By 5:22, the parking lot was empty, the last pickup truck long gone. The only sounds came from the ancient refrigerator cycling in the back and the low murmur of the transistor radio, where someone crooned a saxophone solo over static. A winter weather advisory interrupted the song just long enough to warn that travel conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Claire already knew that. She wiped the counter once, twice, a third time. The same motion she'd seen her mother perform every night, long after the chairs were flipped and the register locked. Claire didn't believe in ghosts, but sometimes the muscle memory felt borrowed. She stared out the window again. The neon open sign buzzed against the dark. Claire reached out finally and touched the switch. The bell above the door jingled. Her heart jerked. She turned, her hand still on the sign. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, the hood of his navy jacket pushed back to reveal a cap damp with snow. His face was raw from the cold, beard stiff with frost. He didn't move at first, as if unsure whether he'd really made it inside. Claire said nothing. He nodded, polite but weary, and took one hesitant step forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and rough. "Any chance you've still got coffee?" Claire stared at him, her fingers still resting on the switch. The wind howled behind him, pushing snow in around his boots. She should say no. She should close, lock the door, save what little propane was left. Instead, she nodded. She moved slowly, deliberately toward the counter, picked up the coffee pot, and poured. The stream hit the mug with a soft hiss. She placed the mug before him, murmurs, "Sit wherever you'd like." Reese settles in. The diner is silent except for the wind. 10 minutes after Reese arrived, the bell rang again. Then again. Then again. Claire looked up from the sink, where she'd just set down Reese's mug. 3 more figures stepped through the doorway, each one brushing snow off their coats, blinking as if they'd just surfaced from underwater. The wind howled behind them, a white sheet pressing against the glass. "Ma'am," one of the men said, adjusting the scarf around his neck, "sorry to bother you. Just wondering if there's room to sit a spell." Claire hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. She thought of the propane tank, how it had made a dry clunk that morning. She thought of the freezer that barely hummed anymore, and the stock list she hadn't updated in days. Then she nodded once, quietly, and gestured toward the booths. The men sat down with the careful quiet of people who knew not to ask too much. From across the room, Reese gave her a small nod, then went back to sipping his coffee, now lukewarm, but cradled in both hands like it mattered. Claire turned to the back shelf and reached behind the tea bags, her hand brushing past a rusted can opener, a forgotten jar of powdered creamer, and finally, something cold and cylindrical. She pulled it out, a tin of cranberry sauce, dented but sealed. A ghost of a smile passed across her face. She placed the tin beside the coffee maker, then filled the second pot, flicking the switch with the back of her knuckle. The lights flickered once overhead, and her heart jumped, but they stayed on. The bell rang again. A younger man stumbled in this time, barely older than 20, pale and trembling. His voice cracked as he asked, "Is it okay if I just stand here for a minute?" before easing down onto a stool at the counter without waiting for a reply. Claire glanced at his hands, blue-tinged, stiff, and turned the griddle back on. She pulled a half loaf of bread from the pantry and sliced it with steady hands. Beside it, she found a near-empty jar of margarine and a small Tupperware of frozen stew meat. Enough for something, anyway. The bell jingled again and again. Soon, there were 9 more. They arrived in pairs, in threes, soaked through and red-cheeked, murmuring thanks as they found seats along the booths, on stools, even tucked near the front door on upturned crates. Claire stood behind the counter, the stew now bubbling faintly, a second pot of coffee, halfway brewed, her cardigan, her mother's, itched beneath her arms. She reached toward the neon switch, but she didn't flip it. Instead, she moved toward the supply shelf and knelt, running her hand along the back row of boxes, powdered eggs, canned yams, one lone bag of year-old stuffing mix. A memory surfaced then, her and Maisie, years ago, stuck in the broken-down sedan on a mountain pass, the heat long gone, baby wrapped in 2 jackets and a picnic blanket. Claire had stared through the windshield, praying someone would stop. No one had. She stood up, brushed off her knees, and returned to the grill. Reese appeared beside her, without a word, and took the snow shovel from the corner. Outside, he began to clear the steps, his movements slow but deliberate. One by one, others joined. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. If this place was going to stay warm, they had to help it. Inside, Claire ladled stew into mismatched mugs, souvenir cups from other diners, chipped porcelain, a holiday-themed one with faded holly. She passed them down the counter, her hands moving almost on their own. The jukebox whirred softly to life. Claire looked up to see a grizzled man nod at her, fingers hovering over the selection buttons. A few moments later, the familiar chords of Country Roads drifted through the room. It was off-key and a little fuzzy, but someone chuckled low in their throat and another joined in. Claire found herself humming before she realized it. Callum, the young man who'd come in shivering, approached the counter with tentative steps. His voice barely reached her over the music. "Are we allowed to stay till morning?" She didn't hesitate. Nobody's going back out there tonight. He looked at her for a second longer, then nodded and returned to his stool, shoulders a little straighter than before. Claire lit an extra burner, muttering, "Let's see how far a bag of potatoes can stretch." By midnight, the diner was full, not with customers, but with stories. The wind had long since faded into background noise, the constant rush against the windows more familiar than distracting. Inside, steam rose from coffee mugs lined shoulder to shoulder down the counter, mismatched and warm to the touch. Claire moved between booths with steady steps, her cardigan sleeves pushed up, her face flushed not from the heat, but from something looser, less burdened, something close to ease. She'd long since stopped watching the snow pile up against the windows. Henry, a broad-chested man with a Navy anchor tattooed on his wrist, sat near the front, telling the others about a Thanksgiving in Germany when he and 2 other Marines shared cold ham from a can and passed around a deck of bent playing cards. Rosa, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, leaned over her mug as she added her own tale of driving solo through the Dakotas just to make it to her daughter's wedding. Rick, whose beard looked like it had survived 3 winters on its own, leaned back in a creaky booth and quietly described the time he hit a moose and totaled his truck, only to be picked up by a woman in an old county EMT van who patched his arm with gauze and said almost nothing the whole ride. Claire, wiping the counter in a familiar rhythm, froze. Her hand stilled mid-swipe. She said nothing, just bent to pick up a fallen napkin and returned behind the till. Behind her, taped to the side of the register, was a yellowed newspaper clipping. The photo was grainy, but you could make out a younger Emily Jean standing in the same spot, ladling soup into a tin cup. The caption read, "Local diner owner shelters lost hikers during 92 blizzard." Claire touched the edge of the clipping and exhaled through her nose. She didn't speak up, not about the van, not about the gauze. She just turned and reached for the stack of white paper cups and a black marker. One by one, she wrote names in neat block letters: Henry, Rosa, Callum, Reese, Rick, and beneath each name, Thanksgiving Traveler. Callum sat straighter now. He had pulled his coat off and was helping Rosa sort packets of sugar from a half-cracked plastic container. He no longer looked like he was on the edge of bolting for the door. Near the heater, someone had strung a line of damp flannel shirts and wool socks, letting the fabric sway in the heat. The back hallway smelled of cedar and wet denim. Reese crouched beneath a flickering bulb near the restrooms, replacing it with a fresh one he'd found in a dusty cabinet beside the mop sink. When the light snapped on, warm and solid, someone clapped softly, and Reese simply shrugged and returned to his seat at the counter. Claire opened the pantry and found, almost miraculously, a sealed bag of cornmeal tucked behind old boxes of pancake mix. With quick, practiced hands, she mixed flour and salt, added warm water, and poured small scoops into a hot skillet. The scent of corn muffins filled the air, soft and slightly sweet. She placed a tray on the counter, and they vanished within minutes. From the corner booth, Rosa waved her napkin. She'd been sketching on it with the end of an eyeliner pencil, the only writing utensil she could find in her purse. When Claire stopped by with another pot of coffee, Rosa slid the napkin across the table. It was a quick but careful drawing of the diner. People at booths, steam curling upward, the heater glowing, across the top, in delicate cursive, the night the table stayed warm. Claire blinked a few times, folded the napkin gently, and tucked it into the drawer beside the register. The laughter was louder now, not wild, just steady. A few voices harmonized badly over a rendition of "You Are My Sunshine," led by Henry tapping his coffee spoon against the side of his mug. It didn't matter that no one was in tune. What mattered was the noise itself, real and shared. In the quiet between songs, a hiss of static broke through. The CB crackled once, then again. "Breaker 19, anyone got ears on Summit Falls?" Every head turned. Claire stepped behind the counter, heart thudding as she reached for the mic. Her hand trembled slightly before she pressed the button. "This is Claire's table," she said. "We've got ears." There was a pause on the other end, then a reply. "Heard you had coffee still flowing." Claire looked around at the mugs, the laughter, the socks drying by the heater. "We're warm," she said. "Come on in." At the window, Reese pressed his hand to the glass, peering through the frost. His voice was quiet but clear. "Claire, there are more trucks coming." Claire rubbed the frost from the window and gasped. There were more trucks, parked side by side like an honor guard. Their engines idled in the slushy dawn, headlights cutting through the pale gray of Thanksgiving morning. Claire leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging the pane. It wasn't just 1 or 2 rigs. It was a dozen, maybe more beyond the bend. Some she recognized from last night. Others were new, trailers gleaming faintly under a layer of salt and frost, company logos barely visible beneath snow-muddied grime. Behind her, the diner hummed gently. The lights above the counter gave off a warm, amber glow. Somewhere by the heater, a tin of yams was warming, the scent mingling with brewed coffee and the last traces of toasted cornmeal. Claire turned slowly from the window, her fingers leaving prints on the cold glass. Reese was already on his feet, stepping back to give her space, his eyes steady but soft. Claire remembered what he'd said the night before, just before the jukebox gave out. Kindness travels faster than CB waves when it's real. She hadn't believed him then, not fully. She opened the door, bracing against the chill, the bell giving a tired jingle. The sound of boots in snow reached her before anything else. A man stepped forward, tall, in a dark work coat, the kind with reinforced elbows and stitched-in fleece. His hair was peppered with gray, and his voice, when he spoke, was calm and low. "Claire Brody?" She nodded slowly. "Name's Ben Ulrich. I run dispatch for West Northern Logistics, out of Rochester." He paused, glanced around the diner behind her. "Years ago, my car skidded out off Route 9A. You were driving a first aid rig, wrapped my wrist, gave me a protein bar, told me to quit gripping the wheel like it owed me something." Claire blinked. "I remember your elbow. It wouldn't stop bleeding." Ben smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Well, you kept me out of the ER and on schedule." Before she could respond, a second man stepped beside him. "You brought me coffee during a whiteout near Montpelier. Said it was on the house. I'd never even been inside your place before." Then a woman. "I had a flat 2 winters ago near Fairhaven. Someone radioed you. You showed up in your apron and patched the tire yourself. Said I looked like I needed to get somewhere more than you did." Claire stared at them, her mouth slightly open. Her hands, still damp from wiping tables, trembled faintly at her sides. "We didn't forget," Ben said. He stepped aside. Behind him, truckers were unloading boxes. Some carried fuel canisters. Others brought pies in cardboard sleeves, sealed thermoses, and tucked beneath one man's arm a CB handset, worn but intact. Another held out a small envelope. "This isn't charity," Ben said. "It's thanks." Claire didn't know what to say. She stepped backward into the diner, holding the door as the group followed. Rosa appeared at her side without being asked, clearing tables, waving new arrivals toward booths and counter stools. Reese crouched near the corner, plugging in an electric kettle someone had placed gently by the door. No one moved with urgency, but there was rhythm, like they'd all done this before, just not here. A trucker in a red plaid jacket took down a coat from the old hook near the kitchen and replaced it with his own flannel shirt. Claire's gaze lingered on the gesture. That hook had once held her mother's favorite shawl. Ben approached the counter once more, this time holding a navy folder. "We made some calls," he said. "A few firms are routing your place into their official stops. This," he tapped the folder, "includes prepaid supply runs, scheduled fuel drops, and a guy I know in Montpelier is offering to sponsor your signage if you'll let him." Claire took the folder, her fingers barely wrapping around the edges. It felt heavier than it should have, thick with things she hadn't asked for and couldn't have imagined. She opened it slightly, caught a glimpse of invoices, typed schedules, and something handwritten. Claire's Table Preferred Northeast Stop Holiday Network. She clutched the folder to her chest. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You already said it," Ben replied, "years ago, when you didn't have to." In the corner, Rosa raised her napkin again, a fresh sketch in progress. Claire glimpsed the outline of trucks lined up like prayer candles, a tiny diner at the center, windows glowing. Claire moved behind the counter, set the folder down beside the register, and reached for the CB mic, her fingers brushing the edge of the cradle. She paused, then pressed the button. "Claire's Table is officially back on the air." A beat of silence. Then came the replies, each one from somewhere beyond the frost and trees. "Glad to hear it, ma'am." "Been too long." "You're clear all the way down I-89." "We're listening." By noon, the diner was louder than it had been in years. But it wasn't just noise. It was possessed. It was laughter and clinking mugs, forks scraping against mismatched plates, the low hum of the jukebox spinning a scratchy Sam Cooke tune. It was children giggling near the window, the creak of folding chairs dragged in from the shed out back, and the heavy boots of truckers moving with the care of people who didn't want to leave. It was life, stubborn, joyful, and utterly unexpected. Claire stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, apron smudged with cranberry sauce and cornbread crumbs. Her hair had fallen loose in wisps around her face, but she didn't care. Not today. Maisie had burst through the front door just before noon, cheeks pink and boots soaked through. She ran straight to her mother, arms flung wide, a construction paper turkey flapping in one hand. "I made this for the window," she declared proudly, her breath coming in puffs. Claire dropped to one knee, pulled her close, and held her for a beat too long. "Where's Mrs. Cavanaugh?" Claire asked, brushing wet snow from Maisie's scarf. "She said to tell you she burned the marshmallows, but is still bringing the sweet potatoes," Maisie answered, already skipping toward the register to pin up her art. Claire laughed, her throat thick. By 12:30, the booths were full, the stools lined 3 deep, and a cluster of locals had begun to filter in. Some came hesitantly, their hands full of Pyrex dishes and curiosity. Others came with purpose, like the town's retired mechanic, Mr. Ellis, who stomped snow from his boots, squinted up at the ceiling, and said, "Heard your heater's been wheezing. I'll take a look." Someone brought cornbread. Someone else dropped off pumpkin cookies with little candy corn faces. A man Claire didn't recognize slipped a folded 20 into the tip jar and whispered, "You helped my daughter once. You didn't even know it." Reese moved between tables, a roll of electrical tape in one hand, wire in the other. "Jukebox is humming now," he said, nodding toward the corner. She just needed someone to listen. Claire looked at him. He shrugged. "Wasn't always a driver. HVAC, mostly, until I got tired of ceilings." "I'm glad you ended up here," she said quietly. "So am I." Behind the counter, Rosa swirled gravy with practiced ease, spooning ladlefuls over makeshift Thanksgiving samplers. Turkey bits from yesterday's unused order, cranberry sauce sliced from the tin, muffins still warm from the morning's batch. Callum, now in a fresh flannel and grinning ear to ear, delivered plates like he'd been born to it. Henry collected empties with a limp in one knee and a grin under his mustache. Claire turned once, just in time to see Maisie crouched by the pie case, chalk in hand, sketching a crude map across the tile floor. At each corner, she wrote the name of a state, Ohio, Maine, Kentucky, Vermont, and drew lines leading to a heart labeled "Here." Truckers leaned over, pointing, correcting, laughing. Above the kitchen pass-through, someone, Claire didn't even know who, had hung a piece of reclaimed barnwood hand-painted in red script, a place that stayed open. Claire stood behind the counter, gripping the edges. Her gaze swept the room. Truckers and townsfolk, old and young, sharing pie, folding napkins, telling stories with full mouths and open hearts. Her throat tightened. She lifted a mug and raised it slightly. 2 second chances and warm coffee. There were no cheers, just soft laughter, clinks of glass, a quiet murmur of assent. It was enough. At the far end of the counter, a young man shifted nervously. His hat was too big, and his beard barely more than stubble. He looked up from his plate, cleared his throat, and asked shyly, "Ma'am, any chance you'll still be open next week?" Claire laughed. "We're open, always." A week later, the snow was mostly gone, but the truckers weren't. Summit Falls had shaken itself dry in the days since Thanksgiving, but the chill hung on, stubborn as ever. The roads were clear now, though salt still streaked the curbs, and the sun hovered low in the sky like it wasn't quite ready to commit. Inside Claire's table, warmth came from more than the heater. It pulsed through the floorboards, clung to the old booths with their patched cushions and fresh varnish. The new curtain rods gleamed faintly in the morning light, and just above the register, a chalkboard sign declared in bold cursive, "Hot coffee and open hearts." Claire stood at the stove, stirring gravy with one hand and sipping from her own mug with the other. She moved more easily now, her shoulders no longer hunched. She wore her mother's apron without the usual knot of grief behind her ribs. 2 more biscuits up, Rosa called from the window. Maisie, perched on a stool near the wall, had just pinned up a poster-sized drawing, a map drawn in bright chalk, with squiggly lines connecting state abbreviations to a bold heart in the center. At the top, in her looping print, Rotes of Gratitude. "You spelled Kentucky wrong again," Rosa teased gently. "I ran out of room," Maisie shot back, grinning. The bell above the door chimed softly as Ben stepped in, holding a folder in one hand and a box of vinyl decals in the other. "Final delivery," he said, offering Claire a brief nod. "Schedule updates, some new routes added you'll want to review, and the stickers for trucks that want to show they're on the Claire's table loop." Claire took the folder and set it beside the till. "You want biscuits first or coffee?" Ben smiled. "Coffee. Always coffee." By 8:30, every stool was full, every booth shared. Henry leaned over a crossword with Callum, arguing about whether a 6-letter word for blessing could be rescue. A retired librarian from town read aloud funny headlines from a tattered newspaper while 2 truckers nodded along. Reese lingered near the back, coat zipped halfway, hands in his pockets. He hadn't said much all morning. Claire saw him through the window as he moved toward his rig. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him out into the cold. He stood beside the cab, watching the sun edge up over the pines. "You're really leaving this time?" she asked, her voice even. He nodded. "Freight waits." Claire rocked back on her heels. "Well, you've got a route now, at least." Reese looked at her then, eyes catching hers for a long moment. "Didn't know what I was looking for," he said. "Now I think I found it." She stepped forward and hugged him. No words. No need. When he pulled away, she watched him climb up, the door groaning shut behind him. The engine grumbled to life. Claire didn't move until the rig rolled down the drive, tires kicking slush into the gutter. Back inside, she crossed to the counter and reached under it for a box she hadn't touched in years. The CB base unit still worked, dusted and wired back into place. She clicked it on, adjusted the squelch, and leaned in. "Breaker 19, you got Claire's table?" Static. Then a chorus of voices, crackling like old memories on a phonograph. "Loud and clear from Route 11. Coming in hot from I-87. Still rolling through Maine, ma'am. Thanks for the pie. Claire's table. Always good to hear you." Claire's hand dropped to her side, a smile blooming unguarded. Behind her, Maisie skipped by with a silver dollar, placing it reverently in the tip jar. "A man said his daddy used to tip like that," she explained. Claire moved to the far end of the counter and pulled a clean mug from the rack. She filled it, set it near the end. No name, no coaster. Just in case. Photos now lined the wall behind the register. One of Emily Jean ladling soup. One of Rosa's napkin drawing, now framed. A faded receipt with Reese's name, dated the night the snow started. Claire traced her finger across the glass of one frame, then looked out the window where sunlight caught the windshield of a passing rig. The CB crackled once more, an older woman's voice, warm and steady. "Your mama'd be proud, honey." The snow had melted, but something deeper remained. Quiet gratitude, stitched into coffee steam and the warmth of familiar faces. What began as one woman's quiet act of decency became a circle of care, proving that kindness, once offered freely, often returns when least expected. Like a porch light left on in a storm, even the smallest gesture can guide someone home. Perhaps that's all a place needs to be remembered, not for its walls, but for the hearts it kept warm. And if this story stays with you, maybe pass that light along.